Now, those two scriptures were written around the year 100, 105. 50 years before that, Paul was writing to the church at Corinth and wrote what has become one of the most common and familiar scriptures of all, his famous 13th chapter of Corinthians, where he talks about love and describes love. Hear these words you've heard so many times before. If I speak in the tongues of humans and of angels, but do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I gave away all my possessions and I hand over my body to be burned as a martyr so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. And what is love? Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable. It keeps no record of wrongs. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things. Love believes all things. Love hopes all things. Love endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now, we see only a reflection as in a mirror, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love remain, these three. But the greatest of these is love. Now, I want to suggest to you that as often as you hear this, indeed, as boring as it may seem to you to hear it again and again and again, that this fundamentally is the Christian message. That this fundamentally is the good news. This essentially is the gospel. It's found in the teachings of Jesus. It's found throughout the Gospels. It's found in the letters of Paul. It's found in the letters of John. It's not something you can cherry pick out of one item in the scriptures that you find standing alone. It is the theme that continues throughout the entire New Testament. It is the theme that continually informs the essence of the Christian message. It is the story that the church has to tell. The story that says God is love. The story that says life is lived most meaningfully when we love one another. is the story that says life's meaning is found nowhere more fully, nowhere more authentically, nowhere more completely than when you are loving and loved in return. And the good news is the meaning of life, the very existential meaning of life itself, is to be found in that reality. That as we struggle in our lives, seeking meaning where there is meaninglessness, seeking response where there is rejection, seeking fulfillment where there is emptiness, seeking relatedness where there is loneliness, the answer is always and only to be found in loving and being loved in return. There is no higher capacity for our humanity than our capacity for loving and being receptive to the love that others bring to us. The good news is we are capable of that. Now, I usually approach these things, as you know, from a psychological point of view, or from a phenomenological point of view, or because of my background from a philosophical point of view, but I want to approach this strictly from a faith point of view today. Because the faith of the church is that because God is love, that all of creation has God's spirit in it. However you conceive of God, the creative force, the eternal creativity, a being out there, however you conceive of God, the one thing that the church agrees on is that the essence of God is the creative reality of love, and that all creation is imbued with that kind of reality. And that we, created in the image of God, we into whose bodies the breath of God has been breathed, we who can see that of God in one another, understand that what we're really looking at is our capacity to love and to be loved. And anytime we turn away from that, we turn away from life itself. That there's no way for humans to live life meaningfully and fully and authentically apart from living life lovingly. Because when we live life other than lovingly, we are no longer at one with what we are meant to be. And that's what the term atonement means, at one-ment. We are no longer at one-ment with ourselves. We are no longer at ease being ourselves. And in that dis-ease, disease, we become ill. Mentally, psychologically, sociologically, and globally. And so what the church's message, as naive as it may sound, in its real profundity is, we need constantly to speak the word of love. Now, there are what we call in philosophy different categories of life. There are the categories of time, that's past, present, and future. There are categories of being, that is self, others, and the world. And there's the categories of faith, that both the categories of time and the categories of being are grounded in the category of faith in the God who is love. And that what the church is called to do is to address all of the issues that come from our categories of past, present, and future. All the categories that come from our relatedness to self, to others, and to the world. with a word of love. I don't know how many times as a therapist I see people afraid to love because of the past. In the categories of time that characterize their life, they've had experiences, they've experienced realities that constituted for them experiences of betrayal, hurt, abandonment, and especially when this happens in childhood, as Paul says, when I was a child, I thought as a child, I reasoned as a child, I acted as a child. Those childhood traumas continue into their present day life. And so every new experience passes through a filter of fear because of their past categories. I can't trust that I will be loved because I've tried to be loved before. I can't trust that my love will be reciprocated because I've given my love only to be betrayed before. And so that past category influences the present category. So they live their lives defensively. And most people, believe it or not, live their lives oriented to the avoidance of pain and negativity rather than in pursuit of love and positivity. How many times do you hear people say don't and not in their sentences? I'm going to have a conversation with someone I care about, and I say, now listen, we have to have an important conversation here, and I don't want you to be upset, and I don't want you to get angry, and I don't want this to disadvantage our relationship, and I don't want this to harm who we are. I have a whole litany of things I don't want to have happen, as opposed to saying, we need to have a courageous conversation, and I want us both to remember that we love one another and that everything that we do is intended to be beneficial to one another's lives. People don't talk that way. They don't think that way. They think in terms of, I don't want you to be mad. I don't want you to be upset. I don't want you to hold this against me. It's an avoidance of the negative as opposed to a pursuit of the positive. And then, of course, that past infecting the present leads to anxiety about the future. That's why therapists spend so much time dealing with guilt and dread about a past and anxiety about a future. Because now everything is oriented to the negativities that make me afraid to love, afraid to trust, afraid to share. And then that shuts me down. And then we go into the categories of relatedness. And so now I no longer feel free to be myself in my relationship to self. I no longer free to be myself openly, honestly, authentically, because I'm afraid to get hurt. I'm afraid you're going to know something about me that you're not going to like. I'm even afraid you might even look at me and not even find me attractive. I'm afraid of all sorts of stuff. And so I live my life fearing what others are going to think and how they're going to be toward me. Because I don't accept me. Because I don't see, when I look in the mirror, the reflection of one who is precious and who's acceptable and who's beautiful. And because of that self, then it affects the way I relate to others. Because since I don't share myself openly and honestly and authentically with others, because I'm afraid to let you really see me for who I am, I withhold myself. And there's no way I can love you while I'm withholding me. And yet people want to love and they want to be loved, but fear holds them back from sharing themselves in the only way that love is allowed to flow. And that, of course, affects their future because now that I have this low self-esteem and because I have lost my sense of self and my value, because I no longer see that of God in me, that beauty in me that makes me the precious, unique person that only I in the world happen to be. Because I can't even imagine thinking of myself in those kinds of terms. Then I approach the future always passing every new experience through that filter of watch out, be careful, don't get hurt. Don't share too much information, be careful. Because after all, what will people think? And so I hold myself back. And so now my categories of past, present, and future have been infected in such a way that my relationship to self, others, and the world has been devastated. Devastated in terms of any kind of full meaning, any kind of full significance, any kind of full authenticity. Anything that even approximates what Jesus said. We said, I came that my joy would be in you. That life is meant to be joyful. What's joyful about all that? What's joyful? What's the good news about all that? And that's why the category of faith is so important. Because faith stands in the face of that and says, in spite of what the world would seek, in spite of what the world would do with me, I trust in the power of love. And since God is love, one could say, I trust in God. That we live and we move and we have our being in the God from whose love nothing can separate us. We are loved, is the good news. We are worthy of being loved because we live and move and have our being in God, who is love. So everything about us is grounded in love. The problem is not that we live our lives separated from love. The problem is we don't trust that we live our lives grounded in love. And that's what the church's story is all about. We have seen in the life of one named Jesus what it is to live your life grounded in love. We have seen in the human life, another human being in our midst, what the incarnation of love looks like. And here in a post-Easter Sunday, we have seen that not even death can stop that reality of love. So St. Paul would say, so death, where is your sting? Because love never ends. So if we are going to proclaim this message of good news, starting with the fact that all of reality is grounded in love because we live and move and have our being, all of reality has its creativity and being in the reality of the love that is God, the eternal love that is God, and that the eternal creativity that lets be all that has been, is, or ever will be is love. That the highest human experience is loving and being loved, that we have seen that possibility actualized in the life of one named Jesus of Nazareth, whom we call Lord, because that sets the standard. To call someone Lord means you set the standard to which we live. Our message is, you are lovable. Our message is, everything about you is lovable, including your mistakes. But if you live in fear, you hide your lovability. If you live in fear of risking, if you live in fear of trusting, then none of us can see the preciousness of you because you're hiding and because you've allowed fear to stop you from loving. And when it stops you from loving, it stops you from living life fully and meaningfully and deeply And then you will live in what Khalil Gibran called that land where you will laugh, but not all your laughter, and weep, but not all your tears. You'll never live fully. And that's a tragedy. So the question we have to ask ourselves as a church is, how do we as a congregation, as a community of faith, help one another become fearless? So that every one of you says, I'm not afraid to be myself here. I'm not afraid to share myself fully here. Because in this context of a loving community, I am free to be myself openly, honestly, authentically. I'm free to share myself without hesitation or pause. I'm able to be myself without facade. Because in this space, I'm reminded how lovable I am. I am reminded how capable of loving I am. Then the church is true to its mission. Then the church is true to what its message is meant to be. Now, this is a difficult message for many people in the church. They really don't want to hear it. You'd think that's a surprise. What's so bad about this message? Well, you see, the problem is that once you start talking this way, that God is love, and those who live in love, live in God, that makes us not as special as we thought we were. Because, only Christians, this is what national Christianity is all about. Only if you're a good white American Christian are you going to be okay. That's just a fear. We see it in our bigotry. We see it in our prejudice. We see it in our racism. It's just fear. Can you imagine living your life being afraid to see another person as precious? You just think about that for a minute. Every day I wake up and live my life afraid to see other people as precious because they're Black, or because they're gay, or because they're trans, or because they're not of my political orientation. It's just on the face of it, doesn't that feel tragic? To live your life every day having to hate someone, having to find fault with someone, having to find the fallacy in what you have imagined the other manifests. Now contrast that with waking up every day, seeing that of God in every person you meet. Where there's neither Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male nor female, because we're all one in love. Now, can you see how sick that would make you? How diseased you would be because you're not at ease being the loving person you're meant to be. And so you sacrificed yourself and all the wonderful possibilities of who you can be because you're busy fearing and hating rather than loving and sharing. The message is right there in front of us. Not very difficult to understand. But it makes it clear that the greatest enemy is fear. Love casts out fear. And then you're free. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's not arrogant. It's not rude. It's not jealous. It's not boastful. It's not insist on its own way. God, doesn't that sound freeing? I can't imagine living my life burdened by jealousy. Living my life burdened by having to insist on my own way. But the good news is the church is a different way. Let us be the church. Let us love one another. And let us have the faith that our past, our present, our future, our relationships to self, others, and the world is grounded in the eternal love that is God, the God who can be seen in each one of us. May it be so.